look at the cash in your wallet. Or more likely, look at the digital numbers in your banking app. It's a bit of a magic trick, isn't it? We've all collectively agreed that these specific scraps of decorated paper, or these glowing pixels, can be traded for a hot coffee, a new car, or a month's rent. But for most of human history, money wasn't an idea you had to believe in. It was something you could drop on your toe and feel the weight of. It was something you could eat, wear, or use. Today, we're going back, way back, to the era of commodity money. Before the printing press, people traded everything from giant stones to fermented beans. If you think inflation is bad now, imagine trying to pay your taxes with a literal ton of salt or a handful of seashells. Welcome to the weird, heavy, and often edible history of what we used for currency before paper took over the world. The earliest form of money wasn't gold. It was stuff you could actually use. Before coins, people used cattle. In many cultures, cows were the first big-ticket currency. But livestock is hard to carry and even harder to make change with. So humans looked for something smaller. Take salt, for example. Around 2,200 years ago, in the Roman Empire and across ancient Ethiopia, salt was so vital for preserving food that it became a standard of value. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in literal blocks of salt. That's actually where we get the word salary, from the Latin salarium. If you weren't worth your salt, you literally weren't earning your keep. Think about that for a second. Your bank account was a pile of minerals in your pantry. If your house flooded, you were bankrupt. Moving across the ocean to the Aztec Empire, roughly 600 to 700 years ago, wealth literally grew on trees. Cacao beans were the currency of choice from the 14th through the 16th centuries. And this wasn't just a casual trade. It was a strictly regulated system. A small rabbit might cost you 30 beans, while a high-quality cotton cloak could go for 65. They even had counterfeiters. Some people would carefully peel the skin off a bean, fill it with dirt, and try to pass it off as a fresh bean in the market. The best part? If the economy crashed, you could at least make a very bitter cup of hot chocolate. But there was a problem with edible money. It rots. It attracts pests.
Ew.
Humans needed something more permanent. They found it in the ocean. If you were looking for the most successful international currency before the US dollar, you wouldn't look in a bank. You'd look on a beach in the Maldives. The Cowrie Shell was the world's longest-serving currency, used as far back as 3,300 years ago, 1,300 BCE, in China and spreading through Africa and the Americas. From the 14th century to the late 19th century, these small, shiny shells were the perfect money. Why? First, they were easy to count. Second, they were impossible to forge. Nature is a great printer. Third, they were durable. You could drop a cowrie shell in the mud, wash it off, and it was still $1. In some parts of Africa, cowries remained a legal form of payment well into the 1900s. However, as global trade expanded, the sheer volume of shells needed for big transactions became ridiculous. Imagine trying to buy a house when the payment requires 10,000 individual shells. You'd need a caravan of camels just to carry your wallet. But what if you didn't have shells or beans? What if you lived in medieval England around year 1100 and you were just a regular farmer? You used tally sticks. This is one of the most ingenious systems in history. You would take a piece of hazel wood, notch it to represent the amount of debt, and then split the stick down the middle. The debtor kept one half, and the creditor kept the other. Because the grain of the wood is unique, the two halves would only match each other. It was a tamper-proof receipt. The British Empire actually ran on these wooden sticks for over 700 years. In fact, they didn't stop using them until 1826. When they finally decided to burn the old tally sticks in 1834, the fire was so massive it actually accidentally burned down the Houses of Parliament. Talk about a market crash. Then there's the extreme end of the spectrum. On the island of Yap, starting roughly 1,000 years ago, they used Rai Stones, massive limestone discs that could be 12 feet wide and weigh several tons. You didn't carry these in your pocket. In fact, you didn't move them at all. When ownership changed, the stones stayed put. Everyone just knew who owned it now. There is even a story of a massive stone that fell off a boat and sank to the bottom of the ocean. The tribe decided that since it was still there, just under the water, it still had value. The owner remained rich even though his money was at the bottom of the sea. It was basically a physical version of a blockchain ledger, established centuries before the internet. Eventually, most civilizations settled on metals: gold, silver, and copper. The first coins appeared in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, around 600 BCE, or 2,600 years ago. They were lumps of electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver, stamped with a lion's head to prove their weight and purity. For over 2,000 years, this was the standard. But as trade moved from local markets to global empires, a massive problem emerged: portability. So why did we stop using the cool stuff? Why did we trade gold and shells for flimsy paper? The answer is simple: convenience and safety. Imagine you're a merchant in 11th century China during the Song dynasty. You want to buy a shipment of silk that costs 1,000 pounds of iron coins. Carrying that much weight is expensive, slow, and makes you a massive target for bandits. The solution? You leave your heavy metal with a trusted person, a proto-banker, and they give you a promissory note, a piece of paper claiming you own that metal. By the year 1024, the Chinese government officially took over this process, creating the world's first true paper currency, called jiaozi. But it wasn't an easy transition. The first paper money was often met with suspicion. In fact, because the government printed too much of it to fund wars, they triggered the world's first instance of hyperinflation. By the 1400s, China actually had to ban paper money and go back to silver for several centuries until they learned how to manage the supply of the story they were telling. Western civilization didn't catch up to paper until much later. The first banknotes in Europe didn't appear until 1661 in Sweden. We moved to paper permanently because of three main things. 1. Weight. $1 million in gold weighs about 50 pounds. $1 million in paper weighs nothing. This allowed global trade to explode because wealth could travel across oceans in a briefcase instead of a fortress. 2. Standardization. Governments could control the supply and prevent people from clipping the edges off gold coins to steal bits of metal. And 3. The velocity of money. Paper allowed trade to happen at the speed of a handshake, not the speed of a donkey cart. We traded intrinsic value, the value of the object itself, for trust. Today, money is just a story we all agree to believe in. It's a social contract. We moved from the thing to the representative of the thing, and finally to the digital record of the thing. But the next time you pay with a tap of your phone or a swipe of a card, just remember, your ancestors would have thought you were a wizard. They spent their lives lugging around heavy stones, counting out fermented beans, and protecting piles of salt from the rain. Our modern system might feel fragile sometimes, but it's the result of thousands of years of humans trying to solve one simple problem. How do I give you something today for something you'll give me tomorrow? Suddenly, that little piece of paper in your pocket, or that number on your screen, seems a lot more impressive, doesn't it? Thanks for listening.